Hi, thank you for introduction. So this is my joint work with Payman Mohassel from Visa Research and Ben Riva from Google. So we had already talked today about secure computation, but we didn't actually hear what secure computation is. So I will briefly cover it, and I'm positive that some people don't know what the secure computation is. So, so the case is a secure two-party computation. In particular, we have our two parties, Alice and Bob, and they have their private inputs x and y, and they want to compute some function f of x, y, but in a manner such that only the output is revealed. Inputs are kept private, and they ensure that the function is computed correctly. So secure computation can be applied in different scenarios, different elections over the internet, electronic auctions, genomic computation, some location-based services. So this list can go on and on. So currently there exist three main approaches how to perform secure computation. The first one comes from Yao's garbled circuit. Second one comes from homomorphic encryption schemes, and another one is based on GMW protocol, based on oblivious transfers. And in particular, about this approach, I will be this talk will be based on this one. So any function f of x, y using special compilers can be converted to the Boolean circuit. So we have a bunch of logical gates, and they're connected via wires. So the question is, so if we can compute this Boolean circuit in this oblivious manner, in efficient manner, then we are done with our computation. So let's jump into GMW protocol from 87. It's pretty old. So we have Alice and Bob, and what they have instead of input bits, they have a shares of input bits. And they have a shares of some input bits x and y, and their task is to compute the shares of the output bit. So if they know how to compute it efficiently, if they know how to do it for, in particular, XOR gate and AND gate, then we can construct any circuit and we can compute any functionality. So our tasks narrows down to how to compute XOR gate and the AND gate. So the question XOR gate is pretty trivial. So what the parties do need to do to compute those output shares? What they just taking their input bits, XORing them, and it's done. The computation is done locally. Everyone has output shares, and we're done. The tricky part is the AND gate. So what do we do, especially when we have these counter products XA, YB, and XB, YA? So how it's typically solved it's by using oblivious transfer. So it's a protocol. So the general overview of it is we have two parties, a sender and a receiver. Sender holds two bits x0, x1, and receiver has his choice bit b. And by the end of this protocol, receiver gets the bit xb, but doesn't know anything about the other one. And sender doesn't know which bit did the receiver choose. And by performing what's called 1 out of 4 oblivious transfer, we can compute the AND gate. So what's the problem here? Is this oblivious transfer, it requires some asymmetric key operations. So if you have a large circuits with hundreds, thousands, and millions of AND gates, it's going to be super inefficient. So what can we do about this? Can we do something, actually? So in 92, Donald Beaver introduced an approach. He said basically which was saying, if we have 3 random correlated bits and Alice and Bob holds the shares on those bits, so the computation of AND gate will require only 4 bits of communication and then a bunch of XORing, and we're done with the AND gate. So the question is then how to get those random the shares of those random bits, random correlated bits. So again, we need to do oblivious transfer. You will ask, so what is the point? Oblivious transfer there, oblivious transfer here. What's the point of using this approach? So the case is here. In the previous approach, we were doing oblivious transfer based on our own inputs. Here we're using random values. So these values can be pre-computed in advance. So parties at some point can get those random values, and then when they want to compute some function, they just send, they just hiding their input bits with those correlated values and do computation really efficiently. So like the protocol right now is divided into so-called offline phase and online phase. Offline when we get those triplets, and online phase when we do actual computation. So here comes handy commodity-based cryptography. So what is that? In cryptography, we always have this trade-offs. Is basically we either secure or we are efficient. So the more security we have, the less efficient we are. So and in case of mobile phones, when we have limited computational power, limited amount of memory, we do care about efficiency. So what if we have some acceptable level of security? Well, if we reveal a bit of information but gain a lot of efficiency. So basically the commodity-based cryptography is saying like there's two parties, they want to perform some computation. What they're aiming, they're looking for some help. And the help not with outsourcing the computation itself, they're looking for some computation material that they will use later on. They cannot produce efficiently themselves. They're looking for it, they will get it, and they will use it to perform efficiently the computation. So having this in mind and those two offline and online phases, let's dive into our protocol. Again, it consists of two phases, offline phase and online phase. So at some point, Alice comes, we have our server token that distributes those shared random bits. So at this point, Alice comes and she says, okay, at some point I will do some computation and I will use at most AND gates. So server generates some keys and the token file, as we call it, which has that, those triples, and send it back to Alice. So I want to emphasize that Alice at this point does not know who's she gonna talk with, with whom she's going to do computation later. So then comes Bob, he does the same, and at this point he again doesn't know anything about Alice. He says like, okay, I will do again the computation and I need computational material for AND gates. The token generates some file, some key associated with the token file and sends the token file back. So then in online phase, Alice already figures out about Bob. They both have independent those token files. They're independent, and then they agree on the circuit that they want to compute. They agree on the session that they're going to use, and basically what they're sending to this token server request with the name of the session and the ID associated with the token file that they use for computation. So what the server does, he says some keys. He sends to Alice keys from Bob's token file, and he sends to Bob Alice's keys from the token file. Having that, at this point, server goes away. Server goes away, and two parties performing computation on their own. At this stage, server is not needed anymore. So our adversarial model is following. So we use the semi-honest token server. He follows the protocols. He generates those that computational materials, those triplets, as expected, and he does not collude with the parties. And it's natural because this can be running. This server can be running as some service in Microsoft Azure or Amazon AWS. So what do we have? We have also malicious parties, and they can arbitrarily deviate from the protocol. So how we can verify whether the output bits that the parties computed by the end of its gate are correct? So typically it can be done by zero knowledge proofs, but in 2012, the paper by Jesper Booth-Nielsen revealed the new schema for efficient bit verification. So basically, we have a mapping schema where every bit comes with the tag It has a MAC. So this, the tag on each bit is produced by using some random string, we call it base, and using some delta key B and the bit itself. So for each wire in the circuit, basically each part, Alice has a bit and a tag of it, and Bob has a base and the delta key. So when Alice reveals a bit and a tag, Bob can easily verify it whether it's true or not, whether it was modified or not. So also this macking scheme has homomorphic properties. So if you need to compute the tag on some bit C, it basically can be performed by doing the tags, XORing the tags, and Bob does the XOR of the bases on his side. So right now we are ready to construct server-aided symmetric protocol. So basically, at this point, Alice and Bob, they come together, they saying, okay, I know Alice, and Alice says, I know Bob, and we want to do computation, and we need that many triplets. And this server, besides those 3 bits, it generates a tag on them and generates on basis on the opposite party's bits. So, but the problem is, what if Alice and Bob does not know each other in advance? What do we do about it? So, naive idea will be when Alice comes and asks token server about those triplets, he can generate for Alice and for Bob and store the Bobs until Bob comes. But it requires extra storage, and we don't want to do it. We want to do something in more efficient way. So our approach is following. Again, Alice comes to the token server and says, like, give me those and triplets with all the bases and tags for Bob's triplets. What server does, he generates delta key for Alice triplets and delta key for Bob's triplets, and additional key. What then it does, it uses a PRF that generates Bob's triples and the tags on them. Then what he does, he picks at random 2 Alice's shares and sets the last value WA for Alice triples. Then he generates a tags using the Alice's delta key and that PRF and that key KA. And also it generates, because he has Bob's tags and Bob's bits that were generated before, and he produces the basis for them. So right now, and then he takes Alice's portion, all the tags and the triples and bases for Bob's part, and sends them to Alice. So what happens when the Bob comes? So when Bob comes, server just sends him the delta key for Alice triples and the KA and says, like, basically you can do everything on your own. It's couple PRF invocation, and you can produce bases and tags for your bits on your own. But keep in mind that according to protocol, Alice will be able to verify those. Okay. So our setup was pretty simple. So we had the token server running under 64-bit Windows machine, Core i5, 8 gigs of memory, and for players we used Samsung Galaxy S3, it's my old phone, and Galaxy Tab S. We utilized only 1 core, and communication between client and server were happening over the internet, and client were done over Wi-Fi direct. So these are the following results that we got. We ran our computation against standard crypto circuits. So we were able to run AES in 1.5 seconds. More interesting are function SHA-1 and SHA-256 that run in about the same time, but the difference in the AND gates is almost tripled. So also we had also very efficient online phase, which required only 64-bit of communication for AES. And you can see that offline phase, what can be done in advance, requires way more communication.
What's the handling distance?
I can tell you in after.
What are you doing exactly?
So we're comparing two numbers. Yeah. So to dive deeper into the bottlenecks, we constructed synthetic circuits that consist only from AND gates, and we constructed those circuits with different depth of the circuit. And what we observed, so even the circuit of 100,000 of AND gates can be computed very efficiently if the depth of the circuit is very, very low. Basically, and it becomes really inefficient when the depth of the circuit grows. So to overcome this, we constructed additional circuits where we did AES and SHA-1 batch invocation. So basically, the depth of the circuit was the same, but we were able to compute multiple blocks at a time. So it lowered down the computation of AES to 0.82 and SHA-1 to 12 seconds from 52. So this is about it. So our contribution is, so we were first who implemented this, the secure two-party protocol with malicious security on smartphones in this commodity-based model. And also, it's the first protocol that introduced the notion that parties do not know each other beforehand. So, thank you. Any questions?